Hey there, I'm Mark from Spectrum Pulse, and today we have from BigXThaPlug, I hope you're happy. I think there's more going on beneath the surface with BigXThaPlug than he probably gets credit. As a Texas rapper with fast declarative flows and a lot of bombast, he's also shown more emotional nuance and complexity between the lines, especially in his relationships around women. Now, I don't agree with his politics. That 2024 Republican endorsement sure as hell feels short-sighted and underinformed, but I also understand his frustration with a system or a candidate that seemingly abandoned or outright attacked a lot of folks in his community, where he feels he's got to stand up for his and his alone, especially if he's trying to get money and get out. It certainly translated when he brought a lot of his crew on stage with him when I saw him at Osheaga this year in Montreal, the majority of whom, I gotta be honest, were not that ready for prime time, but that would probably be the biggest stage they'd see otherwise. He's trying to put them on. And then when you think he would double or triple down on a flurry of bombastic Texas hip-hop, he swerved. He made a country rap album stacked with Nashville talent established or ascending themselves. Maybe it was inevitable given his Texas roots. Maybe you saw how well Post Malone did in 2024 in a similar swerve, cashing in on multiple genres and audiences at once. Or maybe it was just that initial run of singles that charted better than he expected and prompted the bigger project. Either way, it's infuriated a whole bunch of country purists who view him as the latest stain on the genre to be excised, along with the majority of Music Row, often pointing at his criminality if that wasn't a factor to a whole swath of outlaws past and present, and was glamorized by exactly that same audience, kind of revealing, especially when a few such commentators won't even consider something in this fusion or hip-hop to be art at all, and they're proud to say it. But given how mixed to outright negative the reviews have been from diehards of both country and hip-hop, I figured that given where I sit as a fan of both genres, I was pretty much the one that I had to speak on this, review the new album, and I found myself a bit more conflicted than I expected. Now that shouldn't be that surprising from singles like All the Way with Bailey Zimmerman and Home with Shaboozey, both great songs I've praised before, and Hell at Night with Ella Langley, which I like substantially less. That this album, it's a breakup album, almost single-mindedly so, which has prompted some to say that the most BigXThaPlug pull from country music beyond the guest stars was just that subject matter. But it's only part of the story, and before we get into all the weeds with that, let's talk about what doesn't really work in the execution. Notably how BigXThaPlug's rap segments feel inordinately clunky alongside big sung country hooks, largely an issue with the cadence and the slickly polished programmed percussion, where it feels like the songs might smash cut across genres, albeit pretty well balanced and produced to have the elements potentially feel like they could work together on the same song. It's just the fusion doesn't feel that elegant, the groove kind of feels misaligned, and the explanation of, well, that could be indicative of the wave of contradictory thoughts that one goes through in a breakup, that only travels so far. It would also be a mistake to frame all of those hooks as explicitly country in the composition. Darius Rucker sounds more like he's delivering classic blues on the opening title track. 24/7 has Ink delivering a hook that's rooted more in soul music. Between this and Jelly Roll's overly auto-tuned pop soul hook on Box Me Up, let's not act like this is that far removed from mainstream rap these days either. And I've always said that Shaboozey's rollicking belting is much closer to folk than a lot of country progressions, and as much as Luke Combs goes for absolute broke on a monster of a hook on Pray Hard, perhaps one of the most stark moments of tonal whiplash right after the spoken word of Gift and a Curse, it feels like a fusion of southern rock and modern gospel. Hell, maybe those seeds would be given more praise if the album bothered to expand some of these ideas further. With 2 spoken interludes on 11 tracks and still running about 26 minutes, the average song length runs less than 3 minutes, when I'd argue more interplay between BigXThaPlug's verses and the singers on the hooks might have resulted in more intriguing results, or at least a couple more bridges. Ella Langley potentially playing the scorned X on Hell at Night was a pretty smart move. They could have done so much more in that vein there. And look, there are some songs that just don't work for me. Jelly Roll's voice sounds smothered in the drippy Box Me Up, and the venomous this penultimate post-breakup mess about you with Tucker Wetmore doing his best Morgan Wallen impression reminds me that BigXThaPlug and Wallen were supposed to collab and have a song together, and it didn't happen. And quite frankly, if it was gonna sound like this, I'm not complaining. But it is About You, arguably the most angry song on the album, where I realized for a breakup album, if BigXThaPlug was gonna try and rip into his ex, his heart really doesn't sound like it was in it. Similar to the petty things he wished would happen to her on Hell at Night, they never quite felt that convincing. And that had me thinking there had to be a lot more going on here. And truthfully, I think there is. You would expect some sarcastic bitterness off the opening title track with Darius Rucker, but so much of BigXThaPlug's verse is trying to genuinely wish her well through gritted teeth because he plainly still loves her, which is why All the Way was trying so hard for more of a clean break. And the interludes feel illuminating. The first highlighting that for someone who grinds like him, the loss of time actually hurts more than the loss of money. But Gift and a Curse tries to speak on the contradictions of trying to be vulnerable in a relationship, but also feel like he might be overdoing it, which has him get taken advantage of. Another slight given every role as a strong black man on the come-up that he's trying to play. But where in playing that game, he loses more romantic connections that he genuinely wants, especially when that game has helped him put food on the table for his family and to be successful. And you know, if there was a spot on this album where more depth could be unpacked, especially as I get the impression that BigXThaPlug's probably pretty sensitive, pragmatic, and mature, and as Home has him lonely on the road, desperately trying to make one more last swing to reconnect, I think it could be there. But it would also require the sort of larger systemic deconstruction of hierarchies and roles, and even his reality as a touring musician away from his family, of which, yeah, I think he's plenty capable, but I'm not sure he really wants to go there. It adds some metatextual weight to the frustration that's on display, I certainly feel it, but it's left ambiguous whether BigXThaPlug is just treating all this as the facts of his life in order to survive in a hard world, or whether he could see a different change for the better. Again, this album is innovating in some vein. And it leaves the closer, Long Nights, is pretty fascinating. Bro and boyfriend country's resident wife guy, Thomas Rhett, braying all about the come-up narrative, all about hustle and survival, which is genuinely ironic given his nepotistic introduction to the music industry, and how his predominantly female fan base came from more of his sensitive pop-adjacent material, where BigXThaPlug ruefully admits that his plan for success coming out of jail worked way more than he could have dreamed. But the outro is a little bit ambiguous on whether it's speaking to achieve his mother's possible dreams for him, or looking at this ex's presence over the album. A realization the breakup taught him a lot, and he legit hopes that she's happy on the other side, like he admitted on the title track. But to tie it all together, look, this album's gonna get savaged by a lot of people. You're already seeing it in some reviews, and the album's not without problems. The collaborations can feel awkward, perhaps the song's considered rote because BigXThaPlug said he was gonna go make a country album on a whim, and then as a man of his word, he followed through with it, with the abbreviated tracks being highlighted as this being a cash grab from two disparate audiences who want to shit on the other for ironically similar reasons. But BigXThaPlug's unsung strengths are levels of subtle expressiveness, depth, and maturity beneath the bars. And while the genre fusion doesn't consistently work in execution, I do think there's something to the core that it could have afforded a little bit more meat on the bone. I don't expect him to stay with this. He'll be back in celebratory Texas trap flexing before long. But like his work there, I think there's more that will meet the eye and will be appreciated. And I genuinely think this project's worth considering. You're probably gonna ignore it, or you might just rip on it without even listening. I know who we're talking about here, but if you want to give it a chance, go in with an open mind. I think it's worth a shot, all things considered. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you want to see more, please be sure to like, share, drop comments, subscribe. Yeah, I'm more positive on this than a lot of people. Maybe it's just coming from someone who likes both country and rap and can see a lot of common ground and where this album works. And as someone who genuinely likes BigXThaPlug, and I think he doesn't get enough credit for the right things. But I also genuinely think there's more going on here, and I think the seeds of potential were really, really strong. And again, part of this is trying to review the album you have and not the one you wanted. But I also think there's going to be some direct, elements of comparison between this album and how it's getting really torn into versus an album like, say, Somber's newest project, which are both breakup albums with more depth than they will be given credit, but I think even how they're given credit is kind of interesting, especially in 2025. Maybe that could be an interesting compare and contrast. We'll have to see. But hey, if you have comments, leave them down there below. Anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you want to help get albums on my schedule, yell at me on my Discord, or hell, just support the channel, link to my Patreon and YouTube memberships is right over there. Don't feel obligated, tough times, I understand, but the option's available. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.